Hi, today I am doing the DNF tag, a tag about DNFing, which stands for did not finish. So this tag I discovered on my own. I actually hadn't seen anybody else do it. I was just wondering if there was a tag called the DNF tag because DNFing is a part of the book community, and I looked it up and there was. Now those videos were from a few years ago. It's possible that the tag hasn't been circulated around much recently. Like most of the tags I do, I see someone do it more recently and then I decide to do it as well. So as a result, I will be actually tagging some specific people in the description of this video, and whether or not you do it is entirely up to you. I just thought it would be interesting to hear some people's responses to this. I believe the original creator of this tag is Gunpowder, Fiction, and Plot. The first question is, do you DNF? And I do. I'm not against it. Some people may have a strict policy against not doing that, or they don't do it much, especially if they always want to complete a book they start, or maybe they read books pretty quickly, so they'll just get it over with. Now I read pretty slowly, so I definitely do not usually read novels in like 2 or 3 days, so it's definitely not the same for me. So yeah, I don't DNF a lot at the moment, but I have done it a few times this year. But yes, I have done it, and I wouldn't really say I do it regularly, but I'm not against it. It is something that I will utilize. Question 2. If you DNF a book, does it count towards books read for the month? I personally do not count it. I don't think it should count. Whether you read only a little bit of it or half of it or most of it, I don't think you can say you read that book. You can say that you read some of it, and I'm like that with movies too. Sometimes I'll be asked if I've seen a certain movie. Maybe like some of it was playing on the TV in the background while I was in school and I paid attention to some of it, but I wouldn't count that as having seen it because I did not see the whole thing in full. So I'm pretty particular about that. And I'm like that with books too. Like some books, if I've only read some of it, I would not say that I have read the book, especially if you didn't finish it, because like you don't even know what the conclusion was. So I don't believe that it counts. I do not count it. If I had it marked as currently reading on Goodreads or Storygraph, then it just gets removed from the shelves. Well, Storygraph does have a DNF shelf, so that's very nice. But yeah, on Goodreads, it'll just go away. It won't be in my read or want to read or currently reading list. It'll just be gone. Question 3, is there a difference between DNF and just putting it down for a bit? I personally think so. I think that to DNF is a very final decision. I mean, you could always go back to it and try it again, which is related to another question in this, so more on that later. But I think that DNFing is sort of declaring, even if you don't do it publicly, like, I am not going to finish this book, I'm done reading this book. And just putting it down for a bit implies that you're going to get back to it, or that you would like to. Sometimes, especially for people who read a bunch of books at once, they may want to just put down a book. Maybe they realize it's not the right time, or they don't have the time for it, or they're just not in the mood for that particular book, but they would like to continue it later, and I think that's absolutely fine. Like, reading doesn't have to be that serious. Like, we talk about DNFing as if it's like some big thing, and it's really just the term we use to abbreviate the act of choosing not to finish a book. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Question 4, what popular book have you DNF'd? Well, I feel a bit guilty saying this, but I will share my experience. Earlier this year, I attempted to listen to the audiobook of Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green, narrated by the author himself. That book was released earlier this year in March, and John Green is a very popular author. I have read 4 of his novels, and I would say I enjoyed them for the most part. I do plan on reading at least a couple more by him, though it has been a few years since I've actually read anything by him in full. Now, this book initially I didn't even have on my TBR, but it came out and I was like, the audiobook is on Libby, it's easily accessible, I'll try it out. I didn't listen to a whole lot of it before deciding to DNF it, and I think that was the first book I had DNF'd in a long time, and it felt really freeing to do that, to realize that I did not have to dedicate many of my hours to that book and that I could just stop and there'd be no consequence to that. I just realized, like, I know this topic is important, so that's why I feel a little guilty about not finishing it, but I was like, I just don't see myself listening for hours about this topic. And I know that some people really love John Green, and they're like, I'd listen to him talk about anything for hours, and that's great, but I'm not really one of those people. I mean, I like him a little bit, but I don't like watch their YouTube channel regularly. I typically enjoy hearing people talk about things that they're passionate about, but I just thought about it and I was like, yeah, I don't really see myself listening to this whole thing. So I went ahead and just stopped. And like I said, it felt very freeing. Question 5 is, what book do you wish you had DNF'd? I just talked about this in my last video, but I'll mention it again because it's the truth. And for this question, I will say World War Z by Max Brooks, which I read earlier this year, just because somebody else wanted me to read it. So I did read the whole thing. But if I hadn't been asked by someone else to read it. I probably wouldn't even have started reading it in the first place, but I also definitely would have DNF'd it if I had been reading it for whatever reason that may have been. I don't know if I necessarily say I wish I had DNF'd it, because any book I've finished, I'm glad that I've finished it. I know there was a tag I did a little while ago where the question was something like, what's a book you wish you could forget? And I couldn't think of anything. I don't think I've read anything that scarred me that much so far, so I'm thankful for that. I think that any book you read, you can get something out of it. Like with this book, I learned what I don't like in a book. I learned many examples of that, though I don't think I needed to read the whole thing to know that, but I did, and it was an accomplishment, so I'm proud of that. Question 6 is, do you ever reattempt to read a DNF? Has this ever been successful for you? I do want to do that with the book Heidi. I, as a kid, and watched it many times, have seen the 1937 Shirley Temple film adaptation of this, and I enjoyed that. But I wanted to read the book as well, and I remember I got this book from Barnes & Noble on my 15th birthday, and that was a few years ago at this point, and I never ended up finishing this, but I remember at that time I was reading like a lot of books at once and would sometimes just set one off to the side, or I guess sort of DNFing it, just because I was kind of overwhelmed with how many books I was reading, and this was one of them that I picked. Now, this is also an older book. It was published in the 1880s, I believe. I think that nowadays I am able to read more than I did before, and I think I will be better with reading older books. I mean, I read Dracula last year, and that was probably way more complicated. Like, Dracula was definitely an adult story. I think this is considered a children's story. So I think it is considered a whole novel, but I think that the language should be a bit easier. Either way, I think that reading this nowadays, or whenever I get to it, I'd like to read it sometime soon, but probably won't be soon. I think it will be easier now, and I think I'll actually finish it now. So I'll start this from the beginning someday, and I think I'll enjoy it more than I was before. As for if there's ever been a time I've already done that, I'll go to my Goodreads and look. However, before I look at that, I know that I do plan on doing that with more books. Like, there are a couple of Wendy Mass books I want to do that with that I tried reading a few years ago, and nowadays I think I'm a better reader, so I think I have a better chance of finishing them now, so I want to give them another chance. And when I DNF'd any book in the past, well, not all books, but especially if they were from a few years ago, that doesn't really mean that they were bad, it just means it wasn't the right time. I mean, I even did that with The Hunger Games a few years ago, and then when I tried to read it again last year, I was like, okay, it might start off a bit slow, but it should get better, because I had read some of it in school. But like I said, that was the kind of case where we listened to the audiobook, and I definitely was not paying attention the whole time, so I would not have counted having listened to the whole audiobook in school as having read it. Now, because it's an audiobook, I do think that counts as reading, but because I didn't get all of it in. But then when I went to try reading The Hunger Games again, I didn't feel that it started off slowly. I think it starts off pretty fast-paced, and I think that everything in the first few chapters was just setting up the world building and explaining how their government system and stuff works, so it made sense to me and I enjoyed it. So I think I just became more patient with reading over the years. Okay, I looked and I have some examples. There were some books I had a similar experience with, like with the books I mentioned, like Heidi and The Hunger Games, where I read them when I was a bit younger and decided I would read them again later, or maybe I didn't. Like with The Hunger Games, it wasn't until perhaps a few years later when I was like, you know what, I want to give this book another chance. And then with some books, it may have been I wanted to read them but just didn't get to them for a while. So I actually have books like that all the way back from elementary school that I ended up reading in high school or in adulthood that I then ended up finishing and enjoying. One of those is 11 Birthdays by Wendy Mass, the first book in the Willow Fall series that I ended up actually reading in full as a teenager, and I loved the series. The third book, 13 Gifts, was my favorite book at one point. Like, my favorite book of all. I just don't know if I would feel the same way because it's been a few years since I read it. But I remember I tried reading this book from the library. It was a hardcover on like this, but it was the same cover overall. I mean, it didn't have this wish spine. It had the original, which I prefer. But anyway, I remember trying to read it maybe even more than once in second grade, but I did not finish it. Maybe my reading level just wasn't there yet, or my focus and patience weren't there yet. All I know is that the book looked interesting, and it sure does have a nice, interesting cover, I think especially appealing to a kid. But I just did not actually read it. I think sometimes back then in second grade I would read a book and then just put other words where the actual words were, imagining a different story. Just when I had to read, I would just imagine something. So this is a book that I tried reading, perhaps wasn't ready for back then, but then actually read years later and was able to do that and enjoyed it. And then in 5th grade, so at the elementary school I went to, we had a really fun event called The Mall, which we did each quarter, where the 5th graders sold their stuff for the school currency, and everyone in a lower grade would buy those things. It was a really fun event. My elementary school definitely had a lot of fun things that I enjoyed and now miss. So when I was in 5th grade, all the money that we got from selling at the mall was used in an auction at the end of the year. And a classmate of mine had won a copy of Breaking Dawn by Stephanie Meyer. This is not the same copy. This is one I got last year in a box set. The copy that she got had the original cover, and it was a hardcover. Anyway, she got that, and somehow it ended up with me maybe asking to borrow the book, or she offered. I don't quite remember, but I did read a lot. I was probably the biggest reader in my class. Despite having never seen the movies, I knew that Twilight was pretty popular. I had heard some things about it. I think that the last movie came out when I was in 2nd grade. Anyway, that girl said I could borrow the book for the weekend, and I looked at it. It was like, yeah, I can read that over the weekend. I did not read it over the weekend, and even this year, when I did read it for the first time in full, it took me 3 weeks, which is pretty good for a book of this length for me. Not that it matters much, just comparing it. And then I told her, like, I don't think I can finish this in a weekend. And then she told me that I could just keep it. And she even told me how to tell if the perspectives I was reading were Bella or Jacob, like the kinds of things they would say, even though the book specifies whose perspective it is. I remember trying to read it back then, but I don't know if I just wasn't focusing on it or it was just not the right time for me. Probably not, because this was a bit more mature for my age. Like, this is young adult. Like, reading it for the first time this year was perfectly fine for me. But I, like, years later did not remember anything from having tried to read the book. Like, I don't even think I skimmed through it. I believe I tried reading it from the beginning, but I remembered nothing except for Bella telling Edward that she was angry, to paraphrase. For some reason, that was the only line I remember. Maybe because it felt kind of scandalous. I know that line is in the movie too. So anyway, I did not end up finishing it. I did still own the book for a while. I don't know if it's still in the house. It might not be, but I still had it. I also don't know why I wanted to try reading it when it was the 4th and final book in the series, but I don't know. I guess I was just curious. So that was my first time trying to read Twilight, technically, but I didn't actually start reading it until last year after having watched all the movies, and then I started at the very beginning, like you're supposed to, especially with a series like this. So I guess technically those were my early days of DNFing, and then going back to a book when you're ready. As for books that are currently on my TBR, the Wendy Mass books I mentioned were Every Soul a Star and Pie in the Sky. I tried reading those when I was in, I think, 9th grade and did not finish them, but maybe I would do better with them today. I still don't know if I'd like them as much as her other books, but they're worth a try. And the library still has them, so it's convenient in that way. I did also DNF her book Jeremy Fink and the Meaning of Life, and I thought about giving that one another chance. I don't own it anymore, but that one is not at the library last time I checked. If it ever becomes available at the library, then maybe I'll try it again. But I know that one has a film adaptation, so that made me feel extra like I should actually try to read it. When I was around 14, 15, there were a couple books I tried to read that I DNF'd. I mean, there were more than that, but the ones that are on my TBR, like there was Anne of Green Gables. I think that one I just needed to come back to later. I do still want to read that. And there was In the Unlikely Event by Judy Blume. Having read a lot of her books at that time and really enjoying them, that is currently the only adult novel of hers that interests me. But I remember borrowing In the Unlikely Event from the library when I was 15, and I read very little of it and decided that it was just a long, big book that I would maybe try reading some other time. It didn't mean that I wasn't interested in the book or that it wasn't good, but now as an adult it would probably be better for me to read it. Not because it was particularly mature, I don't know if it really was, but just for the reasons I said earlier. Like, now I think I have a higher chance of finishing a book. Those are some examples of books I DNF'd long ago, but more recently I think it's a different story as for if I will, when it comes to if I will try to read them again someday. Because if I'm more likely to finish a book now and I still didn't do it, then I also feel like I'm more likely to try to get through it now. But if it still didn't happen today, I think it's less likely to happen. Like, earlier this year I tried to read Penguin Island. I read over 100 pages of that, but I decided to DNF it, and I don't think I would go back to it unless maybe if someone, especially if it's like a friend, told me that they really recommend it and that I should read the whole thing. That doesn't mean I would, but maybe I'd be more likely if they convinced me. But that's an example of reading a book because someone says you should. So I won't always read a book if someone says that I should, but it perhaps increases the chances. So yes, it can be and has been successful for me to try to read a book again after having DNF'd it. Question 7. What do you do with books you DNF? Well, if they're from the library, I'll just return them, especially if they are from Libby, then I can return them pretty instantly. It's pretty convenient from home. If it's a book I own, maybe I would be open to getting back to it later, But if I have no intention of doing that, especially if the library doesn't have it, I may give it away or donate it or sell it. I haven't done very much of donating or selling books, but I want to try to do that. I do definitely have some books I could do that with. I could donate to a library or a little free library, which I've heard about, and I want to explore those. I believe there are some in my area, but I have yet to check any of them out. But I'd like to do that, and I'd like to make a video about that someday. I definitely would feel more guilty about DNFing a book that I own, and when I own so many books, I think it would be alright, especially if somebody else enjoys it more. I think it would go to more use to just get rid of it, but not as in like throwing it away, as in giving it to someone else, or especially to a library, because then a bunch of people could check it out and potentially enjoy it. Question 8. Do you choose more or less risky titles because of your stance on DNF? Basically, like, are you more likely to read a book you think you're less likely to enjoy because you're okay with just DNFing? I guess I don't pick very risky titles. I mean, I will feel free to DNF if I want to, but I pretty much just read books that I already think I'm going to enjoy rather than checking out a book just because it's controversial or popular. And yeah, I would definitely have the idea that I could DNF, but I just read books I want to rather than to see the hype or the fuss or whatever there is about it. And question 9 is the obligatory tag people. Tag 5 BookTube buddies or however many people you want, and I will tag some people in the description. Again, you don't have to do this, but I actually decided to come up with some people because I know that these people have not done the tag yet. That was the DNF tag. Thank you for watching.